The old theater stood quietly at the end of a narrow street, surrounded by small cafes, bookshops, and buildings that looked as if they had been watching the city change for 100 years. During the day, sunlight touched the faded red bricks and made them glow softly. At night, warm yellow lights around the entrance gave the place a peaceful charm that made people slow down as they walked past. For most people, it was simply a theater. For her, it was something much more. Every time she walked past those tall wooden doors, something deep inside her became quiet. It was hard to explain. Some places carried memories without speaking, and this place seemed to remember every note that had ever been played inside it. She had worked there for almost 8 months. Not as a performer, not as a musician, not as someone standing under bright lights while strangers clapped. She worked behind the scenes, helping with simple things that most people never noticed. She arranged chairs before events, checked tickets when crowds arrived, carried boxes of programs, cleaned small rooms backstage, and sometimes helped older guests find their seats. It was honest work, simple work, quiet work, and quiet was exactly what she wanted. Most people at the theater liked her. She was polite, dependable, and never complained, even when events ran late into the night. If someone needed help, she was always nearby. If something went missing, she somehow found it. If guests were confused, she guided them with a calm smile. But even after 8 months, nobody there truly knew her. They knew she lived alone in a small apartment across town. They knew she arrived early and usually left after everyone else. They knew she rarely talked about her past. And they knew one more thing. Whenever live music filled the theater, she always stopped moving. Even if she was carrying boxes, even if someone was talking to her, even if she was in the middle of a task. For a few seconds she would freeze. Not in a strange way, more like someone hearing a voice they had not heard in years. Then, just as quietly, she would continue working as if nothing had happened. Some people noticed. Most said nothing. One cool autumn evening, the theater was busier than usual. A local arts group was hosting a special community program. Families filled the seats, children laughed in the hallways, and volunteers rushed from one room to another trying to keep everything organized. She moved through the crowd with a small clipboard in her hand, checking lists and helping where she could. Programs are running low near the front entrance. She nodded and brought another box. Extra chairs are needed in the side section. She carried them herself. The backstage lights aren't turning on. She found the switch and fixed it. By the time the event officially started, everyone seemed relieved. Everyone except her. She looked calm on the outside, but inside, something felt different that night. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the music. Or maybe some nights were simply waiting for the right moment to change everything. As the audience settled into their seats, soft piano music began playing through the speakers. Just a recording. Simple, gentle, but it stopped her in her tracks. She stood near the side curtain, holding a box of extra cables, completely still. The melody was not special, not difficult, not dramatic, just a basic tune, the kind beginners learned in their first few months. But her eyes changed the moment she heard it. The sounds didn't enter her ears. They entered her memories. She saw small hands pressing ivory keys. She saw dusty music books. She saw long evenings under soft lamplight. She saw someone sitting beside her, turning pages, correcting finger positions, smiling with quiet pride. And then, she heard a voice. Not in the room. In her mind. Again. Her fingers tightened around the box. Slower. She looked down. Feel the notes. She closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, the present returned. The hallway. The lights. The audience. The theater. She took a slow breath and kept walking. No one noticed. Or at least that's what she thought. Interesting. The voice came from behind her. She turned. One of the stage coordinators stood there holding a stack of papers. He was older, friendly, and always seemed to notice things others missed. He smiled. You always stop when piano music plays. She forced a small smile. Do I? He laughed softly. Every single time. She shrugged. I guess I just like music. He looked at her for a moment. Like it? He paused. Or miss it? Her smile faded slightly. She looked away. There's work to do. Before he could say anything else, she walked toward the backstage storage room. But his question stayed with her. Do you like it or miss it? She didn't want to answer, because she already knew. She missed it more than words could explain. The storage room was quiet and cool, filled with old props, folded curtains, lighting equipment, and forgotten pieces from performances long gone. She placed the cables on a shelf and leaned against the wall for a moment. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them, still steady, still strong, still remembering. She quickly pulled them into her jacket pockets. Not tonight, she whispered to herself. She had made that promise years ago. No more stages, no more performances, no more music. Life had changed. Dreams had changed. Reality had won. And she had accepted it. Or at least, she thought she had. A sudden knock on the door pulled her back. You in there? She opened it. A young volunteer stood outside looking stressed. We have a small problem. She immediately focused. What happened? The intermission performer canceled. She blinked. What? Family emergency. Had to leave. She nodded. Okay, we'll adjust the schedule. That's the problem. The volunteer looked nervous. The audience already knows there's supposed to be live music during the break. She thought for a moment. Use recorded music. The volunteer shook his head. Management wants something live. She frowned. Then find someone. The volunteer looked at her strangely, then smiled. A very dangerous smile. She already knew what was coming. No, he laughed. I didn't even ask yet. You were going to. Maybe. She crossed her arms. No. He leaned closer. Just one tune. She shook her head. No. Something simple. She turned away. No. A basic piano tune. She stopped moving. The volunteer's smile faded when he noticed her silence. He suddenly realized this wasn't a joke anymore. You actually play? She kept her back turned. A few seconds passed. Then she spoke quietly. A long time ago. The volunteer's eyes widened. Well. He smiled again. Maybe tonight isn't so long ago. She turned and looked directly at him. No. Firm. Final. At least that's how it sounded. But inside, the answer wasn't as strong. Minutes passed. Then more. She returned to work. But everywhere she went, the same thought followed her. Just one tune. Simple. Nobody expects anything. No pressure. No memories. No pain. Just music. She hated how tempting it sounded. As intermission grew closer, backstage became more chaotic. People moved quickly. Voices overlapped. Schedules changed. Lights shifted. And somehow, through all of it, she found herself standing near the stage piano. A beautiful black instrument, polished so carefully that the stage lights reflected across its surface like water. She stared at it. Stared back. Silent. Waiting. Then someone behind her spoke softly. Would you at least try? She didn't turn around. Because deep down, she already knew. Tonight was about to change everything. And as her fingers slowly rose toward the keys, the audience on the other side of the curtain began to fall completely silent. Her fingers hovered above the piano keys, only inches away, but it felt like standing at the edge of two completely different lives. Behind her, the backstage area was still full of movement. People whispered. Shoes tapped against wooden floors. Someone adjusted lights. Someone else checked microphones. The sound of pages turning, equipment moving, and quiet voices blended into one soft noise. But in front of her, there was silence. The piano sat under a warm golden spotlight, calm and patient, as if it had been waiting for her all these years. She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly, not because she had forgotten. That was the problem. She remembered too much. Every lesson, every mistake, every hour, every dream, and every reason she had walked away. A quiet voice behind her broke the moment. You don't have to prove anything. She turned. The The stage coordinator stood a few feet away, holding a clipboard against his chest. His expression was calm, almost fatherly. He wasn't smiling now. He wasn't joking. He was serious. "You can walk away if you want." She looked back at the piano. "I thought I already did." He didn't answer, because some answers were obvious. She took a slow breath, then another. Her right hand slowly moved forward, then her left. Her fingertips touched the keys, and the moment they did, everything around her disappeared. The theater, the lights, the people, the noise, gone. All she could feel was the smooth surface beneath her fingers. Cool, familiar, alive. Her eyes closed for just a second, and suddenly, she wasn't standing in an old theater anymore. She was 8 years old again, sitting on a worn piano bench, feet too short to touch the floor, a thick music book open in front of her, a warm lamp glowing in the corner, and a patient voice beside her saying, "Again." Her chest tightened. She opened her eyes quickly, back to the present, back to the stage, back to now. The volunteer standing near the curtain whispered, "Audience is ready." She nodded without looking up. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it. She sat down slowly on the bench. The wooden seat creaked softly beneath her. The stage lights felt warmer now, brighter, almost too bright. She looked toward the curtain. Only a thin piece of fabric separated her from hundreds of eyes. She could still leave. She could stand up, walk away, tell them she changed her mind. Nobody would blame her. Nobody even expected anything. It was supposed to be just a simple tune, a basic piece, a quick performance during intermission. Nothing more. Then why did it feel like the most important moment of her life? She looked down at her hands. They were still shaking. She placed them gently in her lap, closed her eyes, and whispered something no one else could hear. "Please, don't let me forget." Then she lifted her hands again. The curtain slowly opened. A wave of soft applause came from the audience. Polite, curious, nothing more. Most people didn't know who she was. To them, she was just an unexpected replacement. Someone filling empty time. Someone playing background music while people stretched, talked, or checked their phones. Nothing special. And honestly, that made it easier. She looked out for just 1 second. Rows of faces, families, students, older couples, children swinging their legs in seats too big for them, people holding programs, people smiling politely, people expecting nothing. Good. That was good. Less pressure. She turned back to the piano, placed her fingers gently on the keys, and played the first note. It was soft, simple, clear. A single note floating through the theater like a drop of water in a quiet lake. Then another, a basic tune. Exactly what they asked for. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic. Just simple, gentle, careful. The kind of melody beginners learn early. Her hands moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if testing whether the piano still trusted her. And somehow, it did. Each note came easier than the last. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. The shaking stopped. Her fingers began to remember what her mind had tried so hard to forget. The audience kept talking quietly at first. A few people moved in their seats. A child whispered something. A phone screen lit up. Normal. Expected. She kept playing. Simple. Steady. Soft. Then something changed. Not on stage. Inside her. The melody reached a certain note. And suddenly, a memory hit her so strongly she nearly stopped. She saw an old wooden room. A winter afternoon. Snow outside a window. A pair of tired hands turning pages beside her. A smile. A quiet laugh. Music isn't played with fingers. The voice echoed in her mind. It's played with truth. Her chest tightened. And without even realizing it, her playing changed. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. Just naturally. Like a river finding its real path. The basic tune began to grow. The same melody. But deeper. Warmer. Richer. Her fingers moved with more confidence now. More feeling. More life. And little by little, The theater became quiet. One conversation stopped. Then another. Then another. A child stopped fidgeting. Someone lowered their phone. A man halfway out of his seat slowly sat back down. The sound of moving chairs disappeared. Programs stopped rustling. Even backstage, people stopped working. The lighting technician froze. The volunteers stopped whispering. The stage coordinator slowly lowered his clipboard. Nobody spoke, because nobody expected this. She didn't notice any of it. Her eyes were closed now. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't thinking about applause, or mistakes, or fear. She was simply remembering. And every note carried a piece of her story. The years she had struggled. The dreams she buried. The choices she never wanted to make. The music she thought she had lost. All of it, flowing through her fingertips, one note at a time. In the third row, an older woman slowly covered her mouth. In the back row, a teenage boy leaned forward, completely still. Near the center, a little girl stared at the stage with wide eyes. And in the front row, an elderly man suddenly stopped blinking. His body stiffened. His eyes widened. His hand tightened around the program in his lap. He leaned forward slowly, listening, really listening. His breathing became uneven, because it wasn't just the music. It was something else, something familiar, something impossible. He whispered to himself, "No." On stage, she continued playing, completely unaware. The simple tune had become something beautiful, not because it was difficult, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, and people could feel that, even if they couldn't explain why. Her fingers moved across the keys with quiet confidence now. Left hand, right hand, soft, strong, gentle, certain, and for the first time in years, she smiled while playing. A real smile, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere untouched by fear. The final section approached. Her hands slowed. The melody softened. The notes became lighter, like saying goodbye, like closing a door, like finishing a conversation years in the making. She played the final chord, and let it ring. The sound floated through the theater, then faded. Silence. Complete silence. For 1 second, 2, 3. She slowly opened her eyes, and what she saw nearly stopped her breathing. Nobody was moving. Nobody was speaking. Hundreds of faces were staring at her. Not politely, not casually, but completely, as if they had forgotten where they were, as if time itself had paused. And then, a chair moved. She looked toward the front row. The elderly man had stood up. His hands were trembling. His eyes filled with disbelief. And as he stared directly at her, he whispered words that would change everything. "I know that style." The silence in the theater felt heavier than any sound. She was still sitting at the piano, her hands resting gently near the keys, her breathing slow but uneven. For a moment, she thought maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe she had played too long. Maybe she had forgotten where she was. But then she saw the faces. No one looked bored. No one looked distracted. They looked unmoved, confused, almost as if they had just experienced something they didn't expect to feel. Her heart began to race again, but this time it was different. Not fear. Not exactly. Something else. Something uncertain. Then she saw him, the elderly man in the front row, standing, still, looking directly at her. His eyes didn't blink. His expression didn't change. It was as if he was trying to confirm something impossible. "I know that style." His voice had been soft, but in the quiet theater, it reached farther than he expected. A few people turned toward him. She froze. Her fingers slowly pulled away from the keys, as if the piano itself had suddenly become too warm to touch. She didn't understand what he meant. Or maybe she did, and didn't want to accept it. The man took a slow step forward, moving closer to the stage. His hands were slightly shaking, but his eyes remained steady, focused, searching. The stage coordinator, standing near the curtain, quickly stepped forward. "Sir, please." But the man gently raised his hand. "Just a moment." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a quiet authority that made people listen. The coordinator hesitated, then stepped back. The entire room watched. The man looked up at her again. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The question was simple, but it felt heavy. Too heavy. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out, because the truth wasn't simple. The truth wasn't something she could explain in one sentence. She looked down for a moment, then back at him. A long time ago. Her voice was soft, careful, almost guarded. The man nodded slowly, as if he expected that answer. But he wasn't satisfied. "I had a colleague," he said quietly, taking another small step closer. "Many years ago. A teacher." Her chest tightened. He believed something very strongly. She didn't move, didn't speak, couldn't. He used to say, "Music is not about playing the right notes." The words hit her like a sudden wave. She felt it, deep inside. The memory, the voice, the same sentence, the same tone, the same meaning. The man continued. He said music is about telling the truth without speaking. Her hands clenched slightly in her lap. Her breathing became shallow, because she had heard those exact words before. Not similar, not close, exact. The theater around them seemed to fade again. And for a moment, she wasn't standing under stage lights. She was somewhere else. Another time, another place. Sitting at an old piano while someone stood beside her. Patient, kind, certain. "You can't hide behind music," that voice had said once. "It shows everything." She blinked quickly, trying to stay present. The man was still watching her, carefully, as if he was putting together pieces of a puzzle. "Very few people play like that," he said. "Even fewer feel it that way." She shook her head slightly. "It was just a simple tune." The man smiled faintly. "No." He paused. "It wasn't." The audience remained completely silent. No one dared to interrupt. Even the children sat still, sensing that something important was happening. The man took a deep breath, then asked the question that changed everything. "Did you ever study under a man who kept a small clock on top of his piano?" Her eyes widened, just slightly, but enough. Enough for him to see. He nodded slowly, as if that small reaction confirmed everything. "I thought so." She stood up from the bench slowly. Her legs felt weak. Her thoughts felt scattered. "How do you know that?" Her voice was no longer steady. The man stepped closer to the stage, now only a few feet away. "Because I knew him." The words landed heavily. She stared at him, waiting, hoping, fearing. "He was one of the finest teachers I have ever met," the man continued. "Not famous, not wealthy, but unforgettable." Her eyes began to fill with emotion she wasn't ready to face. "I worked with him years ago. We organized small performances, workshops, local concerts." He smiled gently, but there was sadness in it. "He used to talk about one student all the time." Her breath caught, just for a second. One student who understood music beyond her years. She looked away. She didn't want to hear this. Not here. Not now. But she couldn't stop listening. He said she didn't just play music. She lived inside it. Her hands trembled again, the same way they had before she started playing. Only now, it wasn't fear of the piano. It was fear of the past. "What happened to her?" someone in the audience whispered. The man didn't look away from her. "She disappeared." Silence. He continued softly. "Stopped performing. Stopped studying. Just gone." The words felt like they were being pulled directly from her own story. Because they were. She swallowed hard. Her voice barely came out. "People change." The man nodded slowly. "Yes." Then he added quietly, "But talent like that doesn't disappear." Their eyes met again. And this time, she couldn't look away, because for the first time in years, someone saw her. Not the worker, not the quiet helper, not the person who stayed in the background, but the person she used to be, and maybe still was. The stage coordinator stepped forward carefully. "We should continue the program," but his voice lacked confidence. Because even he knew, this moment mattered more than the schedule. The man gave a small nod. Of course. He looked back at her one last time. But I would like to speak with you, after this. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to walk away, to disappear again, to protect herself from everything this conversation might bring. But something inside her, something quiet but strong, refused. She nodded. Okay. The man gave a small, relieved smile, then slowly returned to his seat. The audience remained silent for another second. Then, as if released from a spell, applause filled the theater. Louder than before, stronger, longer, not just polite clapping. Something real, something felt. She stood there, unsure of what to do. She wasn't used to this. Not anymore. The stage coordinator gently gestured toward backstage. She nodded and stepped away from the piano. As she walked behind the curtain, the applause followed her. But she didn't smile. Not because she didn't feel anything, but because she felt too much. Backstage, the noise returned. Voices, movement, questions. That was incredible. Why didn't you tell us you could play like that? Where did you learn? She gave small, polite answers, avoided details, avoided attention. But her mind wasn't there. It was still on stage, still in that moment, still with those words. The clock on top of the piano, the teacher, the student who disappeared. She leaned against a wall, trying to steady herself. Her hands were cold again, her heart still racing. And for the first time in years, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to think about. Maybe she hadn't left music completely. Maybe music had just been waiting for the right moment, the right place, the right reason. And tonight, that moment had found her. She looked toward the stage curtain. The program continued. Voices filled the space again. Normal life returned. But she knew something had changed. She could feel it. And as she stood there, trying to understand everything, one thought stayed with her. After all these years, someone had recognized her. Not by her name, not by her face, but by her truth. And that was something she could no longer ignore. The applause from the audience slowly faded as the main program continued. But inside her, nothing felt quiet anymore. She stood backstage with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of warm tea someone had placed in her hands a few minutes earlier. The tea had already gone cold, but she hadn't noticed. Her eyes remained fixed on the stage curtain, though she wasn't really watching the performance. She was listening to her own thoughts. And for the first time in years, they were louder than the music. People passed her every few seconds. Crew members, volunteers, performers. Some smiled at her. Some whispered as they walked by. Some gave her a small clap on the shoulder. Others simply stared. Word had already spread. The quiet woman who carried chairs, arranged programs, and stayed invisible, had just walked on stage and left an entire theater silent. She should have felt proud, maybe even happy, but instead, she felt exposed, as if years of carefully built walls had suddenly cracked open. "You're hiding." The voice came softly from behind. She turned. The elderly man from the front row stood near the backstage entrance, holding his folded program in one hand. Up close, he looked older than she first thought. His silver hair was neatly combed back. His suit was simple but well cared for. His eyes, however, were sharp, observant, the kind of eyes that missed very little. She tried to smile. "I'm working." He looked at the untouched tea in her hands. "No." A small smile touched his face. "You're hiding." She looked down at the cup. For a moment, she considered walking away. She had spent years avoiding conversations exactly like this. Conversations that asked too much. Conversations that brought back too much. But something about him felt different. Not threatening. Not demanding. Just honest. She finally nodded toward a quiet hallway behind the dressing rooms. 2 minutes. He smiled. "I only need one." They walked slowly down the narrow hallway, away from the backstage noise. Old framed posters lined the walls. performances from years long gone. Some were faded, some nearly impossible to read. At the end of the hallway stood a small wooden bench beneath a dim yellow light. She sat. He remained standing for a moment, studying the posters. Then he turned toward her. "I truly thought I'd never hear that style again." She looked away. "You said you knew my teacher." He nodded. "For nearly 20 years. Her fingers tightened around the paper cup. She hadn't spoken about her teacher in so long that even thinking the word felt strange. The man slowly sat beside her. He was stubborn. She almost smiled. "Yes." The man chuckled softly. "Terribly stubborn." They both stayed quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her. "He talked about you often." Her smile disappeared. She shook her head. "No." "Yes." She looked confused. "How?" He leaned back against the bench. He said one day, he found a student who didn't play to impress people. Her chest tightened. He said she played like someone who listened first. Her eyes slowly filled with emotion. "He told me," the man paused, remembering, "that some people learn music." Then he looked directly at her. "And some people remember it." She looked down quickly. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, warmer, harder to breathe. He shouldn't have said things like that. The man smiled gently. He was proud. Her voice became quieter. "I disappointed him." The man's expression changed. Serious now. "No." She looked at him. "I left." He nodded slowly. "Yes." "I stopped." Another nod. "Yes." "I never came back." He took a deep breath, then spoke carefully. "And yet tonight." He pointed toward the stage. "Here you are." She had no answer for that, because deep down, he was right. For years she had told herself the story was over, that life had moved on, that dreams belonged to younger versions of people, that responsibilities mattered more than passion, that music was beautiful, but not practical, not realistic, not possible. And yet, one simple tune had destroyed every excuse she had spent years building. The man reached into his coat pocket. She watched quietly as he pulled out a folded envelope. Old, cream-colored, slightly worn. He held it carefully, almost respectfully. This was meant for someone else. She frowned. "What is it?" He looked at the envelope for a moment before answering. "An opportunity." She didn't move. He placed it gently on the bench between them. "Next week." He paused. "This theater celebrates 100 years. Her eyes widened slightly. She had heard staff mention the anniversary, but only in passing. Decorations, special guests, large audience, a formal event, the biggest program of the year. The man continued. "There's a special concert." She listened carefully. "Musicians from across the region." He tapped the envelope. "One final performer was invited." Her stomach tightened. "But this morning." He paused. "They canceled." She looked at him, then at the envelope, then back at him. "No." He smiled faintly. "I haven't asked anything yet." Her voice became firm. "You're about to." He laughed softly. "Yes." She stood up immediately. "No." He stayed seated, calm, patient. "Sit." She crossed her arms. "No." He nodded. "Fair enough." Then he simply waited, and that somehow made it harder, because he wasn't pushing, wasn't convincing, wasn't selling. He was simply certain. After a few moments, she slowly sat again. He picked up the envelope, held it out to her. "This is yours." She didn't take it. "I can't." "You can." "I'm not ready." He smiled. "Nobody ever is." She shook her head. "You don't understand." His expression softened. "No." He paused. "I understand more than you think." The hallway fell quiet again. Then he asked softly, "Why did you stop?" The question hit harder than she expected. She stared at the floor. For a long time she said nothing. Then quietly, "Life." He waited. She swallowed. "Bills." Silence. "Family." Another pause. "Responsibilities." Her voice became thinner. "Choices." The man listened without interrupting. Then he asked, "And did music fail you?" He looked at her carefully. Or did life simply ask for too much? Her eyes closed, because the answer hurt, because it wasn't music. It was never music. She had not walked away because she stopped loving it. She walked away because sometimes life doesn't ask what you love. Sometimes it simply tells you what must be done. And for years, she had done exactly that. The man stood slowly. He placed the envelope in her lap. "This is not about fame." He looked toward the stage. "It's not about applause." Then back at her. "It's about unfinished truth." She looked down at the envelope. Her fingers slowly touched it. The paper felt heavier than it should. Almost impossible to lift. The man started walking back toward the stage. Then stopped halfway down the hallway. Without turning around, he said, "Hundreds of people will be here next week." He paused. "Maybe more." Then quietly, "But I'm not asking you to play for them." He finally turned. A small smile on his face. "I'm asking you to play for the person who never stopped waiting." Then he walked away. She sat alone in the quiet hallway, holding the envelope, listening to her heartbeat, listening to the distant music from the stage, listening to memories she thought were gone. Minutes passed, maybe longer. She didn't move. She simply stared at the invitation in her hands. And for the first time in years, the question wasn't whether she could play. The question was far more terrifying. Did she still have the courage to say yes? She didn't open the envelope until she got home. The city was quiet by then. Most of the small shops had already turned off their lights, and the streets looked softer under the glow of old street lamps. A cool breeze followed her as she walked the familiar path back to her apartment. But for once, she barely noticed it. Her mind was somewhere else. Not on the theater. Not on the applause. Not even on the people who suddenly looked at her differently. Her mind stayed on one thing, the envelope. She held it tightly in one hand the entire walk home, almost afraid it might disappear if she loosened her grip. By the time she reached her building, the sky had turned completely dark. She climbed the narrow stairs slowly, step by step, listening to the old wood creak beneath her shoes. On any other night, she would have gone straight to bed. Another long day, another early morning. But tonight wasn't normal. Nothing about tonight felt normal. She unlocked her apartment door and stepped inside. The room was small, simple, quiet. A bookshelf, tiny kitchen, a lamp near the window, a chair beside a small wooden table, and in the far corner, covered carefully beneath a faded cloth, stood something she hadn't touched in years. She looked at it, then looked away. Not yet. She placed her keys on the table, set the envelope down, took off her jacket, then sat quietly for a moment, staring at the paper as if it might speak first. Finally, she picked it up. Her fingers hesitated, then slowly opened it. Inside was a formal invitation. Cream paper, elegant lettering. The theater's 100-year anniversary concert. Special guests, professional musicians, a full audience, live broadcast to local stations. Her heart skipped. She kept reading. Final featured performance. Her eyes stopped moving, because below those words, there was a blank space. A performer's name had not been printed yet. She didn't need anyone to explain why. Her hands began to shake again. She placed the paper back on the table, then stood up, walked toward the corner, and slowly pulled the cloth away. Dust floated into the air. Underneath stood an old upright piano. Not polished, not beautiful, not perfect, but familiar, painfully familiar. Her fingertips touched the wood, and memories returned instantly. Late nights, early mornings, warm tea, music books, mistakes, laughter, practice, again, again, again. Her eyes slowly closed. She hadn't touched this piano in nearly 7 years. 7 years. Long enough for dreams to feel foolish. Long enough for talent to feel like someone else's story. Long enough to believe that part of her life was over. She sat down slowly on the bench. The cushion sank softly beneath her. Her fingers hovered over the keys, just like they had at the theater. Except this time, There was no audience, no lights, no applause, only truth. She pressed one key. The sound wasn't perfect, slightly out of tune, old, worn, but real. She played another, then another, slowly, carefully, a simple scale, nothing more, and suddenly, she missed a note. She stopped. Her chest tightened. She tried again. Another mistake. Her breathing changed. Faster now. Her fingers stiff. She looked down at her hands. Come on. Her voice was barely a whisper. She started again. One note. 2, 3. Mistake. She pulled her hands away. Frustrated. Embarrassed. Even though no one was watching. She stood up quickly and stepped back. This was stupid. Her voice sounded sharper than she intended. She turned away, walked toward the kitchen, poured a glass of water, took a sip, then another. But even standing there, she could feel the piano behind her, waiting, not judging, not demanding, just waiting. She looked at the clock. Almost midnight. She should sleep. She had work in the morning. Real life. Responsibilities. Normal things. She looked back toward the piano, and something inside her refused. She walked back, sat down again. This time, slower, calmer. She placed both hands on the keys, closed her eyes, and remembered the words. Music isn't played with fingers. It's played with truth. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. She stopped trying to be perfect. Stopped trying to impress. Stopped trying to sound like the person she used to be. And simply played. The notes came softly at first. Simple, honest, a little uncertain, then stronger, warmer, more natural. Hours passed. She didn't notice. The city outside grew quieter. Lights in nearby windows disappeared one by one. But inside that small apartment, music returned. Not as performance, not as memory, as something alive. When the first morning light finally touched the window, she was still there, still playing, still discovering, still remembering. And for the first time in years, she smiled without sadness. The next 7 days passed faster than she expected. Work at the theater continued. Schedules, programs, decorations, guests, rehearsals. Everyone moved quickly. Everyone seemed excited. And everywhere she went, people looked at her differently now. Some smiled knowingly. Some whispered. Some asked questions. She answered very little. Because the truth was, she still hadn't decided. The invitation stayed folded inside her bag every day. Untouched. Unanswered. Until 3 days before the concert. That afternoon, she found the elderly man sitting alone in the front row of the empty theater. No lights. No audience. No music. Just silence. He looked up as she approached, and smiled. You took your time. She sat beside him, still holding the envelope. He noticed immediately. You haven't answered. She looked at the stage. No. He waited, patient. She finally spoke. What if I'm not good enough anymore? He smiled softly. That's not the real question. She looked at him. He leaned forward slightly. The real question, he paused, is whether you're willing to be seen. The words hit harder than anything else he had said. Because he was right. It was never about the music. Never about the notes. Never about skill. It was about fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being known. Fear of becoming the person she once dreamed of. And failing. She stared at the empty stage, then quietly asked, what if I make mistakes? The man smiled. Then you'll sound human. She laughed. A real laugh. Maybe the first in a very long time. Then she looked down at the envelope. Her fingers slowly opened it. Pulled out the invitation. Looked at the blank space beside featured performance. And without another word, she picked up the pen he offered. Her hand trembled. Just slightly. Then, she wrote her name. The man looked at it. Then nodded once. Not with excitement. Not with surprise. But with certainty. As if he knew all along. That night, as she walked home through the cool evening air, her heart beat harder than ever before. Because now, there was no turning back. The concert was 2 days away. And for the first time in 7 years, the world wasn't waiting for her to hide. It was waiting for her to walk back into the light. The morning of the concert arrived quietly. No thunder, no dramatic sunrise, no sign from the world that this day would change everything. Just soft light slipping through her apartment window and landing gently across the old piano in the corner. She had barely slept. Not because she was afraid. At least not only because of that. Her mind had been full all night. Memories, questions, doubts, hope. The kind of thoughts that refuse to stay quiet when life is about to change. She sat at the edge of her bed for a long moment, staring at her hands. The same hands that carried boxes. The same hands that cleaned chairs. The same hands that had quietly worked behind the scenes for months. And also, the same hands that once dreamed of stages. She slowly opened and closed her fingers. No shaking. That surprised her. She stood up, walked toward the window and looked outside. The city looked normal. People heading to work. Buses moving. Coffee shops opening. Children walking with backpacks. Life moving forward like always. And somehow, that made her smile. Because while the world kept moving, today she was finally moving with it. She made tea. Simple. Warm. The way she always did. Then she sat beside the piano one last time before leaving. She didn't play. She just touched the keys. Lightly. Almost like thanking an old friend. Then she whispered something only the empty room could hear. Whatever happens. She smiled softly. Thank you. By late afternoon, the theater looked completely different. The old brick building that once felt quiet and familiar now looked almost magical. Golden lights framed the entrance. Large banners hung above the doors. Fresh flowers decorated the lobby. Guests in formal clothes filled every corner. Cameras, reporters, musicians, staff, volunteers, laughter, footsteps, voices. Everything felt bigger, brighter, faster. She entered through the backstage door, carrying only a small bag and a heart that suddenly remembered how fast it could beat. One of the volunteers spotted her immediately, and froze, then smiled so wide it almost looked painful. You're here. She laughed softly. Apparently, within minutes, people began gathering around her. Questions, compliments, encouragement, nervous smiles. She thanked everyone politely, but her mind was somewhere else. On the stage, on the piano, on what was coming. Finally, the stage coordinator stepped through the crowd, still holding the same clipboard, still noticing everything. He smiled. Thought you might run. She smiled back. I thought so too. He nodded toward the hallway leading to the stage. 5 performers before you. Her stomach tightened. 5. Suddenly that didn't sound like enough time. Or maybe too much. He lowered his voice. Nervous. She thought about lying. Instead, she nodded. Yes. He smiled. Good. She looked confused. He shrugged. Nervous people care. Then he walked away. She sat quietly in the dressing room while one performer after another walked on stage. She could hear every applause, every introduction, every cheer. Each one made her heart beat faster. She checked the clock, then checked it again, then stopped checking. Her hands were cold now. She rubbed them together, took a deep breath, then another. Across the room stood the elderly man. He had arrived without her noticing. He leaned quietly against the wall, watching her. Not speaking, not interrupting, just present. After a few minutes, he walked over and placed something gently in her hands. A small object, cold, metal. She looked down and froze. A tiny silver clock. Her eyes widened. She looked at him. He smiled. He kept it on every piano. Her throat tightened instantly. She held the little clock carefully, almost like it might break. How? The man nodded softly. He wanted you to have it. Her eyes filled with tears she quickly tried to hide. The man spoke gently. He knew. She looked up. Knew what? He smiled. That one day. He paused. You'd come back. She couldn't speak. Not yet. The theater erupted with applause outside. Another performer had finished. The coordinator appeared at the doorway. His voice was calm. "You're next." Her heart stopped, then started again. Faster, stronger, real. She stood up. Her knees felt weak. Her hands trembled again. But this time, she didn't hide it. She carried the small clock with her as she walked down the hallway, step by step, toward the stage, toward the lights, toward everything she once left behind. At the edge of the curtain, she stopped. She could hear hundreds of voices, programs moving, seats shifting, the quiet energy of people waiting. She closed her eyes, and for one final moment, fear tried. Fear whispered, "What if you fail? What if you forget? What if they expected too much? What if you're not who you used to be?" She took one slow breath, then another, and answered the fear quietly. "Then they'll meet who I am now." The stage coordinator smiled and opened the curtain. The lights were brighter than she remembered, warmer, almost blinding. The audience stretched farther than she expected. Every seat filled, balconies full, standing room occupied. Cameras pointed toward the stage. For a second, her body wanted to turn around, to run, to hide, to go back to carrying chairs and folding programs and living quietly. But then, she felt the tiny clock in her hand, and everything changed. She walked forward. The applause began. Warm, respectful, curious. She reached the piano, placed the clock gently on top, exactly where it used to sit, and suddenly, she wasn't afraid anymore. She sat down slowly, looked at the keys, closed her eyes, and placed her fingers where they belonged. The first note came softly, simple, clear, honest. The second followed, then the third, and within seconds, the theater disappeared. She wasn't performing. She wasn't proving. She wasn't trying to impress. She was simply telling the truth. Through music, through memory, through every choice, every sacrifice, every year, every tear, every silence, every dream she buried, every piece of herself she thought was lost. The music grew. Soft became strong. Simple became beautiful. Beautiful became unforgettable. Some people in the audience smiled. Some leaned forward. Some quietly wiped their eyes. Some forgot to breathe. Even the cameras seemed forgotten, because what they were hearing wasn't perfection. It was something rarer, something human, and that reached deeper. Minute after minute, the music filled every corner of the 100-year-old theater. The walls, the balconies, the stage, the seats, and the hearts of everyone listening. Then, the final notes came, gentle, light, almost like goodbye, or maybe, like beginning again. Her fingers lifted. The final sound floated through the theater, and faded. Silence. Complete silence. 1 second. 2. 3. Then, the entire theater stood. Every single person. Applause exploded through the room like thunder. Louder than anything she had ever heard. People cheering, clapping, smiling, crying, standing. And in the front row, the elderly man stood with tears in his eyes, and simply nodded. She looked at him, then at the tiny clock, then at the audience, and finally, for the first time in many years, she didn't feel like someone who had returned. She felt like someone who had finally arrived. Hours later, after the crowd had gone, after the lights had dimmed, after the applause had become memory, she stood alone outside the theater. The night air felt cool, peaceful. She turned around one last time and looked at the old building. The same building she once entered quietly, invisible, forgotten, hidden. And tonight, she smiled, because she didn't leave the theater as a worker. She didn't leave as someone running from her past. She didn't leave wondering who she was. She left in complete awe, because for the first time in years, she had finally heard herself again.